Welcome to Game Changers with Molly Fletcher, where we take you behind the scenes with peak performers to learn what makes them tick and discover how you can apply their lessons to your life. I'm your host, Molly Fletcher. A retired four-star general, General Stan McChrystal, is the former commander of the U.S. and international forces in Afghanistan and the former commander of the nation's premier military counterterrorism force, Joint Special Operations Command. He's the founder and CEO of the McChrystal Group and a senior fellow at Yale, where he teaches a popular course on leadership. An expert on leadership and teams, General McChrystal is the author of several books, including his latest book, Risk, which is out now. In today's conversation, we talk about the future of leadership, leading through change and uncertainty, and how to mitigate risk inside of our organizations. There are so many incredible leadership lessons in this one. Check it out. Here's my conversation with General Stan McChrystal. Well, sir, what a treat to have you on. You know, you have spent, obviously, decades in leadership. And one of the things I wanted to start with is different leadership skills are needed for different missions. But what are some of the non-negotiables of leadership, right? The things that a leader must possess?
Well, if we talk about skills, I really got to parse it into starting with values, and they're not really skills. But I think if a leader doesn't have certain values of consistency, of integrity, I call it self-discipline, the ability to do what they know is right. Because most of the problem with leaders is not knowing what they should do. It is finding themselves personally unwilling to do it when it's inconvenient or hard or unpleasant or something like that. And so if we talk about skills, if you start with that and you hone your ability to know what your values are, have them to be values that you admire, and then find the self-discipline to execute, you're about 2/3 of the way there. Now, there are some other things that we see good leaders do that are more behavior oriented. One would obviously be treating people with respect and having empathy for them, communicating effectively. And of course, communicating is part of it's a talent some people are born with, charisma or being very articulate. But really, communication is effort. It's being willing to be very clear with people and sometimes repetitive, but also that willingness to listen, because communication is two-way. And then the final part I'd throw out is the ability to make decisions. And we all make thousands of decisions every day, mostly very small decisions and routine. But there are many decisions that require a much higher level of talent, which means you got to do the due diligence to gather the right kind of information, to listen to the right people, to consider the right factors, and sometimes to show the right amount of judgment and courage to make the decision that in your heart or your gut is right, but isn't always going to be popular in the near term.
Do what you want most, not necessarily what you want right now, right? That's kind of what I'm hearing you say.
I think it was Margaret Thatcher who said leaders should make decisions that will be unpopular today and respected 10 years in the future.
What would you say are maybe some of the biggest myths relevant to leadership?
I think the biggest one is the fact that the leader is everything we need them to be. It's the great man or great woman theory of leadership. And it really got a lot of popular play for centuries. And we talk about history being bent by certain leaders. They bent the arc of history. And had Abraham Lincoln not arrived, the United States wouldn't have survived. If Franklin Delano Roosevelt had not been president, we would not have survived the Depression of World War II. And so we put them up on pedestals and we say that, thank the Lord, periodically these great people arrive. And that's really not my study or my personal experience. It's much more complex than that. In reality, it is a leader who has the willingness to play a role during a critical period. It is the context of the moment. It is all the things going on. It's the people that they lead, who they interact with. You could call them followers, but it's probably wider than that. It's partners as well. So, and understanding that the great man or great woman theory of history is flawed makes us think, okay, well then, what does that mean? One, it means that we can't assume that that great leader was responsible for all the good things that happened as a result of that period, or the bad things if they're an ineffective one. We can't hang all the blame or give all the credit to these single leaders. We need to be careful about trying to emulate them, because it's not that many of them aren't worthy of us learning from and emulation, but the reality is they operated in a very unique moment in every case, because every moment is unique. My father was an officer right at the end of World War II for 30 years. And he talked about right after the war, there were all these George Patton wannabes. And there were guys walked around, they looked like it, they carried pearl handle pistols, they cussed, but none of them could be him because it wasn't real for them. And so if we catch ourselves trying to be what one of these great men or women is purported to be, one, we're not going to be very good at it. And usually we'll find that they weren't exactly what the two-dimensional version of them is made to be anyway.
We've got to be true to ourselves, right? And true to the environment in which we're inside of in that moment when we lead.
Exactly. It doesn't mean that we can't be better. If we say be true to ourselves and I'm just a lousy person, then I should just be a lousy person.
Right. Let's go. Right. Sure.
But we, at the same time, we have to be who we are.
Leaders right now are dealing with all kinds of uncertainty, navigating all kinds of change. Two things that without question, sir, you are remarkably familiar with. What's your advice to leaders who are coaching their teams right now as it relates to change, to uncertainty on how to navigate these moments?
Yeah, here's my conclusions to where we are. The first is we are in a complex environment, as you say, where things are changing really, really quickly. And not only are they changing, we are bombarded with the information technology whirlwind of information. So that makes it even more bewildering, because you're trying to see the big major shifts that are happening, but there's so many squawking voices, saying other things. It's hard to pick out the signal from the noise. So the first thing is try to figure out what the signal is from the noise. Understand that not everything is genuine change or a genuine movement, but realize that's always going to be hard. The second is accept the fact that adaptability is the new currency. Efficiency was for a while. How efficient can I be? But that was based on a certain stability. You can't be really efficient unless you do the same thing repetitively, because you learn and you can work out weaknesses. I think we've seen this in our supply chains. We let our businesses focus on efficiency because that's what capitalism does very well. And we created these very fragile supply chains that went around the globe and were tight as a bowstring to maximize profits. And then when we had COVID-19, we have other upsets in the world, we find how vulnerable they are. And so if we step back and say, we've really got to be adaptable, we've got to be resilient, which means that when the waves get higher and the wind blows stronger, our boat can't sink. And so I tell people in organizations, if they start with that mindset, now that is at tension with maximum efficiency. And so leaders in organizations have got to understand that maximum efficiency, when the sun is shining bright, the sea's calm, and the wind is going one direction, is great. But you can't stand it if you create too much brittleness or fragility. And so I think we've got to be much more adaptable and realize that we have got a different answer to the question every day.
Sir, in your role leading the Counterterrorist Force Joint Special Operations Command, you had to cast aside conventional wisdom and reimagine the way things were done, right? What types of things did you have to change, and how did you get the buy-in?
Yeah, really a challenge. As a bit of background, which I know you're aware of, but listeners might find good. The counterterrorist force was designed to do counter hijacking, hostage rescue, and those were very precise, elegant operations. If you've seen them on TV, it's almost like a ballet, and each person in the TV show knows their role, and they go to the right point and they do the right thing, and the mission goes off brilliantly. I never went on one of those. The reality is, it never goes like you hope it will. So the first thing we had to understand was that wasn't the war we were going to fight. Now, that had been the war in times past. That had been JSOC's mission for the first 22 years from 1981 to 2003 of its history. And then in Iraq, with the emergence of a new kind of enemy, Al-Qaeda in Iraq, we had a much bigger enemy, a much faster and information technology enabled enemy that gave them different DNA. So they were very adaptable, very lethal, very rapid, constantly growing. And they weren't fragile because they didn't operate as a traditional structure. You couldn't go find Miss Big or Mr. Big, take them out and collapse the organization. And that was very frustrating because that was sort of a doctrine of special operations. Go find that critical point and go attack it and win the war. So we had to change our organization to do a lot more, to do it a lot faster. And this is going to sound long, but to accept the fact that an 80% solution tonight is better than a 100% solution tomorrow. And it was a war for intelligence. It's like whichever side could figure it out first wins. And so it was a fight to see how much you could do with the goal of learning so you could do more, be more effective. And to your point of how do you get an organization that was grown up to do things on a very occasional basis, but do them to a standard of perfection, of elegant perfection, and change it to an organization that's going to do, instead of one thing a month, you're going to do 10 every night. And that is offensive to people who say, now, wait a minute, we've always done it, and say, we can't afford to do that. And also an organization that hated failure on mission, so they always wanted to try to mitigate the risk of failure to zero. And you'd say, listen, I don't care what your batting average is. All I care is that we win the game. And so failure is part of that process. And that was a mental shift. So the way I made the argument to the force was, first and foremost, I said, we're losing the war against Al-Qaeda, which we were, and for about 2 years. So you make that case. And then the next case is, we have to do more, our part of the command, because we're only part of the major effort. There's many other forces and all. Our part of the contribution has got to be much bigger, and it's got to be leveraging capabilities outside our command. And so we got to punch above our weight. And some people, as in any organization, they grabbed it and they go, I got that, and they're running with it. There are others who were more recalcitrant, and you had to, on a daily basis, repeat your narrative. And as we made success, we needed to point out we're successful because we're doing this. And, some people you just have to win over time. They're slower to embrace it.
That's interesting, though. Repeat the narrative, right? I love that. I saw great coaches do this really well. It is marry empathy and accountability, right? How in your role have you and did you lead with both, right? Empathy and accountability. I think leaders are having a hard time with that right now. That's a challenging, it's a challenging thing to execute against, but so important.
I think it's because we sometimes make those two terms in our minds too rigid. Empathy, we tend to think of as sympathy. And we say we're going to go rub people's belly and make them feel good. Empathy is understanding other people's perspective, being able to put yourself in their position, think how they think, and therefore be able to lead them in a way that respects, where they are in this thing. So I think understand if their position's hard and all. Now, that doesn't mean that you're going to reduce accountability. Accountability has a kind of a negative tinge to it. It's sort of, I'm holding you accountable. Well, in accountability also means you get credit for success. because you were accountable. So, really accountability should be, we expect you to get this done, and responsibility tucks up into there, authority tucks up into there. Because you're accountable, we have to give them both the authority and the responsibility and resources to get it done. So what I found was, if you give people missions, not specific tasks, solve this problem, and then they get to figure out how to do it. But then you say, I need you. Nobody else is going to solve this problem. There's nobody you can look to less like you are responsible for doing that. And then you can also communicate, I know this is hard. Tell me what you need. I'm on your side. I'm not here to just grade your homework. I'm here to make you successful. But the bottom line is, you have to solve this problem. And when they feel like they're part of a team doing it, and you're cheering them on as opposed to just grading them, you get a different response.
And when they feel like it's a mission, I need you. I love that narrative. That's good stuff. Based on your experience, based on your training, do you feel that resilience, you talked about resilience, can be taught, or is it a trait that a person's born with?
Yeah, that's a great one. I think everybody's born with slightly different responses to adversity. Some people are more optimistic. Some people are more less sensitive. And so you got some advantages. But I think it can be taught. And I think one of the ways is scuff people up a little bit. Think about, in sports or something. I remember at the beginning of football season, you'd go out there and you're always a little tentative until you get your clock clean the first time and you realize, I'm not going to die. And so, okay. And so I think the more times you get scuffed up, the more times you're put in very difficult positions, the more it makes you ability to respond to that. Now, you don't want to I remember the idea at West Point when I first went was upperclassmen would haze underclassmen. And that was the idea was make you resilient. You get yelled at, you get pressured. And to a degree, it did some of that. It pressured you, it made you survive it. What you don't want to do is create people who then become bullies in their own right. So, I think there's always a balance. I think you can push people really hard. You can get really good things out of them without being so negative that you turn them off.
Right. I mean, to me, it's a bit of a muscle that through reps we strengthen.
Yes.
Right. I mean, that's sort of what I'm hearing you say.
Absolutely.
Well, we talk about individual resilience, right? And obviously inside of the environment we're in right now, that is incredibly important. What comes up for you when you think about team resilience, right? Like how to build more collective resilience as a team?
This is really important, Molly, because I think we as a nation and many teams are struggling with that right now. And it gets back to the idea of accountability and responsibility. Once you are on a team, there is a joint responsibility for the outcome of what the team is trying to do. And it's not just a group of individuals that are been together. But if the team fails, we've got to have this sense that we all are responsible for that. We're agents for that failure. It's when you create this idea that just because it's a group of people that none of us are actually accountable, that you weaken that. And teams sometimes, individuals can become resilient because they have no other choice. They, if they're going to survive, that's what they do. Teams, if people watch their teams fail, and they all kind of say, well, the coach is no good, or the team captain's no good, or those other people aren't doing their part, or any number of things, you can have no resilience in an organization because you don't have the sinew that connects the teams. And so it's really the hard part, because a team needs to be more than the sum of its parts. But if each individual, responds individually and they're not linked together effectively, then you don't get the advantage on that. So that's the way I approach it. It may be the biggest disappointment I've had in the last year and a half is watching the United States of America not respond as a team to COVID-19.
What do you think we could have done differently?
Well, an awful lot. If we step back and we say COVID-19, what a perfect enemy. If you made a movie about it, I mean, everybody can hate him. It's like Martians, they're nobody's brother, and so it's this faceless enemy. It strikes everybody generally with the same threat. But the beauty is we knew it was coming because we know pandemics are coming with relative regularity. We also know what to do about it because our body of knowledge on public health is very good through experience. And then in this particular case, we got a scientific miracle because they produce vaccines faster than ever in the history of mankind. So if you put those three things together, you know the problem is coming, you know what to do about it, and oh, by the way, you get this extraordinary help from miracle weapon. And yet, we didn't communicate well. We didn't pass information clearly or candidly across our society. We didn't have a clear narrative. In fact, we confused our narrative in some cases with politics, in some cases with other motivations. We let inertia cause us not to do things. And the nature of dealing with a pandemic is leaders must act before the problem gets to exponential growth. Because if you wait until it gets out, you're chasing it. And so we had a failure of leadership. We had a failure of willingness to adapt, to change the way. We had a failure to bring together the different parts of our nation. We actually fought COVID-19 as 50 separate states, not a unified nation. And so we failed, and we failed very painfully. But it's not COVID-19's fault. It's, I laugh at this. They say the evil COVID-19. Well, it's just a thing, and it's not 10 feet tall, and it's absolutely defeatable. And so we ought to go stand in front of a mirror. We ought to all look in the mirror and say, the greatest risk to us is us. And so the greatest opportunity for improvement or salvation, if you want to use a broader term, is right there in the mirror. It's us.
Sir, your military career, and I know you've talked about this, didn't end the way you envisioned it would end. What did you learn from that experience and that you took with you moving forward in your life?
Yeah, thanks for asking, Molly, because no, it didn't. After 34 years of commissioned service and 4 years before that at West Point, an article came out in Rolling Stone magazine. I thought the article was unfair and inaccurate, but it didn't matter. It just created a dynamic for the president of the United States that I thought was unworthy of a general causing that kind of problem for the president. So I offered my resignation, and President Obama accepted it. And I don't feel good about the article, but I feel good about what I did about it in the moment. And I very much respect his decision. But in that moment, I'm a 55-year-old person who was born in an Army hospital, raised in an Army family, went to West Point at age 17. So my entire identity is now swept away. And in the short term on the news, I'm disgraced general on the ticker every 2 minutes. That only lasts a couple of days. But the reality is you have to make a decision in that moment of how you're going to go forward, what the rest of your life's going to be. In retrospect, and I wasn't this clear to me at the moment, but in retrospect, I had the opportunity to be a bitter, aggrieved old soldier. I could have said, I got screwed by Rolling Stone. It was unfair. And people would have taken me to lunch and heard my story out and all that kind of thing until I bored them. And I could have spent a lot of time sort of marinating in my own bile, my own bitterness. But what's the point? Nobody really cares except you. And so I made the decision along with my wife, without us having had a formal conversation, to live looking forward. I joke, I say, my wife lives like she drives with no use for the rearview mirror. And so the whole idea was we were going to live going forward, and we were going to try to conduct myself in a way that anyone who knew me before would say, yeah, that's the Stan McChrystal I knew and cared about. And so the article was an aberration. Anyone who didn't know me before would say, wow, I read that article, but this isn't congruent with that. And what it's done is it's been self-reinforcing. I focus more forward. I'm on more positive things. I do things. I've crafted a new life for myself. And I still love friends from the old life. But the reality is, by looking forward and by not allowing myself to spend a lot of time being angry or bitter, I'm able to get a lot more done. And I think I'm a lot better person to be around than I would be. Because, after everybody's heard your sad story once, they really don't want to hear it again.
Right, let's go.
I could have won the
Totally.
big game and I didn't.
Right.
And I just think it's healthier all around. So what I always tell people, and it's funny, when military officers get released from the service or they have some kind of, car crash in their lives, people send them to me. And I found it's a funny position to be in. They say, Stan, he had this, car crash. You better go talk to him, see what he did. And so,
sure.
The one thing I always tell them is you can't relitigate the past. There's no point. So just look forward, whether you did something wrong or not. If you did something wrong, just don't do it again. Do good stuff now. If you didn't do anything wrong, be what you always were.
In just a minute, we'll get back to the conversation. But first, I want to share a free resource for you. Through this podcast, I've had the opportunity to connect with more than 100 leaders, championship coaches, elite athletes, business leaders, and thought leaders. I've learned so many valuable insights from these conversations that I decided to distill it down into 7 mindset shifts that can help you reimagine your role as a leader. You'll also get a playbook with exercises to help you put these principles into action. To get your free playbook, just go to mollyfletcher.com/mindset shifts. Again, that's mollyfletcher.com/mindset shifts. When you think about that world that you were in, right? We think about what our country's been through as it relates to, the work that we've done in Afghanistan. When your phone rings, right, like you just mentioned, with people who call you, what do you tell them as it relates to the way we've navigated this moment over the last, several months?
Yeah, Molly, I tell them that it's hard. And anybody who wants to find a single scapegoat or single decision that caused that, I think that they're probably off base. I think it's much more a set of a variety of factors that came together, a couple of which are just fate. The certain things play out the way they do. And so you can't always judge decisions by their outcome. When I look at a decision, I use 2 factors. I say, did the person make the decision using the right values? And then the second is, did they make a reasonable decision based on the probability of the outcome? And then the outcome's different. The outcome is often the flip of a card or the toss of a coin. And so you judge the validity of the rationality of the decision. And I judge a decision maker on that basis, not the outcome. Now, obviously, it's sad to see what has transpired in Afghanistan. And I spent a lot of time talking to former comrades, Afghans and Americans. And I think that what we do now is we say we made a lot of mistakes, all of us, and I would say from day one, we made a lot of mistakes. We also did a lot of good things, and we should be proud of them. So what we should do, however, is learn, why didn't it come out the way we wanted to? And I think there are lessons there. And I think in many cases, that is a failure of our system, because I didn't see any single person make any one decision that I think doomed this thing. I think it was a bunch of things. But in the end of the day, it was good people with good intentions working hard. And yet we didn't get a great outcome. And so if that's the case, you have to ask, okay, if we put those good things together, why didn't we? And I think part of it's a failure in how our government interacts now, how we develop and execute policy. And that needs to be tightened up, or it will happen again. And so I think the military, civilians, everybody can learn. But if you oversimplify it, you're going to walk away with a very narrow, superficial excuse. And if we find an excuse for why we failed, then we won't look further. We won't learn. We can't say, I don't believe that Afghanistan was undoable as a task for us to help the Afghan people develop their sovereignty. I think it was absolutely achievable, but we didn't achieve it. So now we need to step back and say, Why didn't we do that? And what implications does it have on how we ought to reform some things going forward?
You have written a few books on leadership. You know a whole lot about leadership. How have your own ideas of leadership evolved over the years? You know, when you think about what we just talked about as it relates to Afghanistan, when we think about your entire history in the military and your world now, how has it evolved?
Well, I'm going to use the term organic in how I think about leadership more than I used to. When I was young, like a lot of people, I wanted to be a great leader. So I read about great leaders, great men and women. And I looked at what they did and didn't do. And I said, well, if I do those things, I'll be a good leader. And of course, that doesn't really work that way, because many of the behaviors that great leaders or respected leaders showed was very different from that list of 7 habits of effective leaders or whatever. It's not a set of absolute traits or behaviors or anything. It's much more organic. It depends upon the situation you're in, the people you're leading, your own capabilities. And so I think about it as a much more complex system. I think that the leader is a player in that system, but what the leader needs to do is, instead of being the leader, Stan McChrystal is not a leader that does certain things. Stan McChrystal is a leader that reacts to the system, the situation they're in, the context of the moment, and all those things, and leads appropriately for that. And that's that requires a little bit of a chameleon, like, a shapeshifter. And yet we traditionally don't like that. We try to say this is the way that person is, and they are sort of inflexibly good or inflexibly strong, that sort of thing. And I don't think that that's the right approach. The leader is trying to achieve a certain outcome with a group of people. And so the leader's got to do whatever that is. They've got to orchestrate the moment to achieve that.
You know, you have a new book, Risk, and love the title. It's about leaders' approach to handling risk. What made you want to write this book now, right? And what would you high level, the big takeaways?
In my whole military career, we talked about risk. We tried to measure risk. We put matrices and risk in. And then after I got out and was working in business, like on the board of Deutsche Bank USA, we had a risk committee, and we would look at. But the reality was, we would do a lot of things to sort of formally assess risk. But in the end, we made very intuitive decisions, not related in many cases to data, but related instead to sort of gut feeling. And sometimes we did it well, and sometimes, often, we did it very poorly. And we were very weak in my entire career of communicating risk. If I asked you about something, I said, what's the risk on that? And you said, high risk. I would have no idea what your frame of reference for high is, and vice versa. And so I realized that I think we do risk really poorly. I also think that came to the conclusion that the real problem with risk is not the threats that are coming at us, it's our own vulnerabilities. Because we really can't predict all the threats that are going to come. I mean, we know that threats are coming. We just don't know exactly what they are or when they're coming. So trying to build a Maginot Line to solve a certain problem is usually a waste of time. Instead, if we look at our own vulnerabilities and we say, what we're going to do is be really flexible. We're going to be basically strong, healthy, really flexible, etc. We'll be effective. And what we came to was the human immune system. If we think about our bodies, we have this miracle system that every day faces about 10,000 threats. And the system detects the threats, assesses whether they're dangerous to us, responds to them, kills them, and then learns from that, remembers, like a vaccine does. And we don't think about our human immune. You don't get up every morning and say, whoa, I hope my immune system works.
Sure.
Until it doesn't. And you have autoimmune. And then suddenly you are vulnerable to things that otherwise would give you no pause. And organizations and societies have the equivalent. We have a risk immune system. And it is all these factors: communication, narrative, bias, diversity, timing, adaptability, leadership, that together become a system that gives us the ability to detect threats, assess, respond, and learn, gives us that resilience. And the beauty of this is you have this system and you have agency over it. You can strengthen it. You can spend time making sure that your organization communicates well, that you've got a diverse set of perspectives, eliminating blind spots, that you can make decisions in a timely fashion. And because you can do all this, you can ready yourself for threats before you know what the threat is. And so in doing, you can decrease the risk to the organization. And I think that it gives us hope. It should give us opportunity because we can do something. We don't have to stand and wait and worry about what the next big risk that is approaching is.
Well, I love the metaphor of the risk immune system and the way you speak to it as it relates to us as human beings. I mean, it's really easy to comprehend that, right? To put ourselves inside of that headspace, if you will, of how we can, in fact, get out ahead of it, combat it, anticipate it, prepare for it. I love it. In the book, you talk about the power of narrative inside of organizations. What are some symptoms that we might have a misaligned or weak narrative inside of our organizations?
Absolutely. We believe in narratives. How many times have you been part of an organization where you self-identify with the idea of it? The Marine Corps does a brilliant job. People will die for the idea of being a Marine. And yet, how many times have you been in an organization, either been in it or been visiting it, you walk by and they've got a slogan on the wall that says, "We are strong and we are brave and we are honest." And then somebody looks at it and they make a joke. "Yeah, we're not that honest," or they roll their eyes. And as soon as you have a gap between the soaring narrative that we have about ourselves, we are the best, we are the most honest, with what people believe to be the reality, you have a say-do gap. And it's difference between what you say and what you do. And in the middle is cynicism. And the more cynicism that builds up in an organization, the more dangerous that is. And so the power of our narrative, we have a great story in the book about, the United States touts itself as home of the brave, land of the free. And in 1957, Vice President Nixon is in the African country of Ghana, celebrating their Independence Day. And he's going along talking to people, and he sees a black man, and he walks up to him and says, "So, how does it feel to be free?" And the guy says, "I wouldn't know. I'm from Alabama." And one of those stunning moments, here's an African American there, and from his standpoint, the narrative about the United States is incongruent with his experience in 1957 Alabama. And he's absolutely right. Our narrative was a good thing, but it was aspirational more than real. And so organizations, on the one hand, want and need for their narratives to try to make them better, but they can't be cynically inaccurate. And if there's a gap, the organization has got to take it on and try to bring reality up to the higher if they can.
Right. When I'm hearing you say when the narrative is sort of misaligned with the purpose, the values, or even, the strategy at some level, that invites risk inside of our organization. Yeah.
It makes us weaker.
Yep, for sure. Why is diversity part of risk mitigation? How can we and why should we, operationalize diversity inside of our organizations?
Yeah, I want to make sure people understand, because I'm going to give a kind of a nuanced explanation here. In 1961, President John F. Kennedy, brand new into office, executes an operation recommended to him by his predecessor, Dwight Eisenhower, to invade Cuba with Cuban expatriates. And he goes through his decision-making process with a bunch of old white guys. And it's a bad plan, badly executed, and it's a terrible failure. And the problem was he didn't have diversity of thought in the room. Now, the problem was not that he didn't have women or different people of different ages or different racial backgrounds. It's because he didn't have different perspectives, people who brought different expertise, experience, and whatnot. 18 months later, he does the Cuban Missile Crisis. He assembles his leadership group again because it's 1962 America. It's all white guys. But it's a very different group of old white guys. He has purposely brought in people with different viewpoints, different perspectives and whatnot. And so what they do is they eliminate the blind spots and they tease out options to give him a range of options as opposed to just one. So the point I make is we don't want to confuse diversity with equality of opportunity. Equality of opportunity is a right. It is something every person should have. It should be absolutely bedrock in our organizations, and we should pursue it forever. Diversity is right, but it's not a right. It's right because it works. It makes organizations stronger. We're not diverse just because, it's a nice thing to do. We should be diverse because it's more effective and we will win. Again, I completely push equality, but diversity is a practical operational imperative. And people need to understand that real diversity isn't always superficial. It's not different sexes or races or religions or whatever. It's much more importantly, people who bring different thought patterns into the room.
When you think about leadership and the future of leadership after COVID-19, what kind of leader is best positioned to perform, to succeed, to win, if you will, moving forward?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I'm going to put it in the lens of COVID-19, but I think it applies to other things. I think the first is the leader is going to have to be very clear in communication, meaning spin and trying to be too cute with how you communicate with people to get your point across isn't going to work as well. We've seen that the leaders who have done best in this situation have gotten in front of people and say, we have a big, difficult problem. We don't completely understand it. So what we ask you to do will probably change. But the reality is we are humbled by what we know and what we don't know right now. So I think that's the first. The second is leaders are going to have to be able to make courageous decisions or positions and stick with them to people. They're going to have to say, I'm asking you to do this, and I'm asking you to do this because. And I know you're not going to like it, but that's the right thing to do, and that's what we're going to do. I think that they will be challenged by the fact that there's so much misinformation, which is largely, in my view, unintentional. Disinformation, which is intentional, is going to always make that difficult. But I think leaders who understand that a drumbeat of accurate, candid information, honesty, are probably in the long run going to come out most effectively.
You've been incredibly generous with your time. I want to hit you with some rapid fire. You're used to rapid fire. I'm going to hit you with some rapid fire and questions, and we just so you just tell me what comes up. Morning or what's your morning routine or your evening routine?
I get up very early and work out first thing because for me, it's really important to do that. Evening, I read, but then I go to bed very early because I got up early in the morning.
What's a book you recommend most often for leaders to read?
It's funny. I recommend an old 1968 novel titled Once an Eagle, and many military officers will tell you about this. It's written by a guy named Anton Myrer, but it's a story of two Army officers who grew up from the age of the First World War up into the 1960s. And it's just this extraordinary study of two personalities, sort of one really good and one not so good, but it captures lifetimes and careers brilliantly.
Wow, cool. I'm going to check it out. What's the best piece of leadership advice you've ever been given?
Boy, this sounds stupid. I've never been asked that question before that I remember.
Okay.
I think it probably came when I was very young and I was just starting to lead a platoon. And a soldier came to me and he had a problem that a sergeant hadn't treated him well. And I went to another young officer and I said, slightly older than me, and I said, well, what should I do? Should I support the sergeant, even though they made the wrong decision, or the soldier? And the guy looked at me and says, what's right? Do what's right. I mean, I should have known that, but
Yeah, no, but that's awesome. Who's a leader you admire?
Yeah, I've had so many leaders that Ulysses Grant is one that I admire, maybe because he's very approachable. He's very human. He has as many flaws as he has qualities. But generally, I think he was trying to do the right thing. The great story when he was out of the Army and not yet back in for the Civil War, he has one slave and he frees him. He owns nothing else. I mean, Grant is poor. Just a guy who's got a personal modesty, and yet in the moment, he can grow and be, an extraordinary military leader.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. What's a habit that you have deployed in your own life and it's improved your life?
Yeah, I think it is working out. I work out every day. I'm 67 now. I work out hard, relatively speaking, and I think it makes me better, not because it makes me healthier for sure, but it is a discipline to it. It is a rigor. I will not allow myself to not do it. And I think that Bill McRaven said it perfectly with Make Your Bed. It's certain good habits. And if you can increase the number of good habits and over the number of bad habits, it just does you so good. But I think creating that, for me, working out.
Yeah, that's awesome. So the show's called Game Changer. So one last question. Who's a game changer, or what game changer inspires you and why?
It's funny. Whenever I think of game changer, I think of someone who comes up with something so innovative or so different that they force everybody else to do things, bringing the forward pass into football. Dick Fosbury, inventing the Fosbury flop in 1968 and changing the way everybody does high jumping. I think information technology is the thing that has been the game changer for everyone. And I think we're still struggling with it. It's not a person, but it's a reality now. And I think that it has, in many ways, cheapened our discourse, but it's also potentially gives us the ability to connect in ways we never had before. So it's a two-edged sword, but I think it's changed society more than anything else, certainly in my lifetime.
Here are a few of my favorite takeaways from this incredible man and this incredible conversation. Number one, leadership starts with your values. Most of the time, leaders know what to do. It's whether you do it when it's hard, when it's inconvenient, and when it's unpleasant. Define your values and develop the self-discipline to execute. Number two, adaptability is the new currency. How good is this? We are in an environment now where there is a different answer to the question every day. As General McChrystal says, it's no longer about efficiency. It's about adaptability and resilience. So good. Number three, we are all our own greatest risk. In other words, look inward. Organizations and leaders can mitigate risk by examining their own vulnerabilities. Too often we focus our efforts on what we can't control and neglect the many things that we have the agency to correct. Thanks, as always, for listening to Game Changers with Molly Fletcher. If you like the show, be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts. There you can listen to previous episodes and leave us a review, which helps other people find out about the show. This episode was edited and sound designed by the team at Sound On Studios. You can find out more about their work at soundonsoundoff.com. Check it out. For more about me, visit mollyfletcher.com. Until next time, stay curious and be bold.